Hey again everyone, Noah Neutron here, and I wanted to make a video after I let the whole internet cool off a bit after the whole fiasco because oh boy was it a lot. I didn't want to add to the various articles and videos spewing out everywhere and waited to calmly collect my thoughts, which I think now I effectively have. Now, Doctor Who. It's a long-running series that's been around since the early 60s, even predating Star Trek by a few years. And it's been an institution of science fiction, not just in Europe, but the entire world it feels like. And I did not get into the series until a few years ago. I know a lot of people grew up with this series, even in the States, but I never got into it when I was a kid. Not because I didn't enjoy it, in fact, Doctor Who has quickly become one of my favorite pieces of fiction of all time. But no, it was more because I didn't have anywhere to look into it. It wasn't airing on PBS, and I couldn't find it on streaming until a few years ago. And truthfully, streaming Doctor Who in the US is a pain in the ass anyway. The only parts I had really seen pretty much was the whole era of the Ninth Doctor, Christopher Eccleston, at my uncle's house because he was a big fan of the show since he was a kid. And safe to say, I really liked it. Genuinely, it was great, but I didn't pursue it after that because there wasn't really an easy way for me to get into it. Years upon years later, I started watching the series mainly because one of my best friends for years told me to start watching Who, which, believe it or not, is the same guy who got me into Farscape, so safe to say I'll never judge his taste again. I actually started with the 11th Doctor era because it was the 11th and 10th Doctor I saw the most as a kid, and I just couldn't get enough. And then I watched the 10th Doctor era, which actually goes way harder after watching the 11th Doctor's era, then the 12th Doctor, rewatched the 9th Doctor, and then tried to watch the 13th Doctor's era but stopped somewhere in her second season because the writing was unbearable. Which then Tubi added all the Doctors from the 60s to 80s, which I went and watched most of that, except for stories from the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Doctor eras. Sorry. And here we are today, with the 15th Doctor. And safe to say it was high highs and low lows. I mean it. I don't think this era was anywhere near as bad as it could get, and trust me, it can get incredibly bad. You have zero clue. So I thought, why not share my thoughts on this era? Maybe not a super in-depth dive, but a general overview on some of my thoughts, my favorite episodes, and some of my negative thoughts as well. Because this was a very interesting and fluxative time for Who. But let's warp right in, shall we? Oh, and also massive spoilers, so if you haven't seen any of these seasons yet, that's your warning right now, okay? Hey, before we get any further, my analytics tell me that about 95% of my viewers aren't subscribed. Look, I don't really like when YouTubers do this either, but maybe think about subscribing if you like the video, and check out some of my other videos too. I'm hoping to at least make it past the 500 subscriber mark soon, and I hope you can help me do that. It genuinely helps and makes me happy because I don't really make money on these videos whatsoever. They're mostly just done as a passion project, but if I could make money on these videos and you'd help me get there, I'd really appreciate it. And hey, maybe once I hit about 1,000 subscribers, I'll try and make a big special video. But sorry for the interruption. On with the video. Season 14/Season 1. So this season I think was just fine. I think the series has some of my favorite concepts and episodes to be portrayed by Who, but also has some episodes that I think just don't work at all in my opinion. In fact, I think this series has one of my least favorite episodes of Doctor Who ever, and I've seen a lot. The overall direction of the season, or I guess the overarching plot or themes, is a bit interesting, which is the Doctor coming across gods or godlike entities. Of course, you still have the classic sci-fi concepts mixed in there, but it also leans into a more fantastical direction at times. And I don't inherently disagree with the idea. The Doctor has been fighting gods ever since his literal first incarnation. Plus, the 11th Doctor also has a lot of fairy tale theming and concepts and handles it tremendously well. But at least in this season, I think it falls a little flat, especially for the main villain, Sutekh, which really bums me out because the Pyramids of Mars is a genuinely great episode of classic Who. In that episode, Sutekh was so horrifying, the Doctor couldn't do anything about it. But here he beats him by tying him to the end of a rope and dropping him into the time vortex? Like, there seriously wasn't any sort of workaround or magical concept he could have used. No, he just ties him to a rope and tosses him into the vortex? Okay, whatever you say. I don't know. I think conceptually the idea of Sutekh coming back and being this harbinger of death is a great concept. In fact, the final two-parter has some great moments, especially the moment where the Doctor speaks with a mother on a dying world due to Sutekh. That's a distinct moment of humanity and empathy that is especially unique to Doctor Who. You probably remember me saying earlier that this season has one of my least favorite episodes of Doctor Who. Well, it's episode 1, Space Babies. And not for the reason you think. The story itself is fine. It's nothing special or significantly bad. Nobody makes an insane leap of logic, and nobody's really acting significantly out of character. You see, this episode sat wrong with me from the moment I watched it because this episode is about the Doctor and Ruby on a space station full of hyper-intelligent babies. Now, that concept seems rather sweet, even if the effects can lean onto the eerie side for the babies. See, my problem with it is that this episode has a lot of implications about the scenario they're in, and I really dislike the fact that they treat it as absolutely fine. The civilization that built the space station uses it as what's called a baby farm, which is a station where you basically grow infants straight from some kind of machinery. Apparently, the society that created this baby farm does this because their species is sterile, which, okay, but isn't this eugenics? Or at least in the same realm as that? I mean, this whole episode just made me think the whole time about how they create babies on the station, and the fact that they're hyper intelligent. Are their genes being manipulated? And mind you, these babies are created to be hyper intelligent. They had to do something to make them that way. But no, instead that's perfectly okay. Let's not consider the possible moral ramifications or justifications for why a society would do that. I'm not even saying this is an inherently evil thing. I could easily see societies needing to eventually cut out genes at birth to maybe get rid of genetic plague or something, but we don't focus on that at all. And that left me genuinely upset because Doctor Who works best in these morally gray or morally complex situations. That, and again, the Doctor doesn't see any issue with an entire society genetically altering their next generation without the consent of anyone, really? I don't know, I don't have any negative thoughts this extreme on any other episode from this season, but I think I'll shift into speaking about my favorite episode. That episode being Boom. And of course, it's written by Stephen Moffat. The dude just gets Who, you know? He lives, eats, and breathes Doctor Who. And of course, he comes in with a super unique concept. It's just great. We get a 40-minute nail-biter of an episode with a ton of great character work, and even some great commentary on the corporatization of war, religious manipulation, and so much more while still being an enjoyable premise. Moffat has always known how to balance political and historical commentary with insane sci-fi premises, and honestly, this was the episode that really sold me on the best of this new Doctor. After now speaking on my favorite episode, I'll just add a piece here speaking about the two main characters, that being the Doctor and Ruby. Now, I really like Shurigawa's Doctor. I think he's super charming, likable, and really funny. His interpretation of the Doctor feels like that one close friend you have that just so happens to travel a ton, and I like that. My only real gripe with his Doctor in this season and the next is that I feel like we don't get to know him too well. Now, I know we technically know a lot about the Doctor already, yeah, but I mean, I wanted to get to know his deeper mindset, how he reacts differently in comparison to his previous incarnations and how he acts similar, which is a major part of the fun of seeing each new actor's version of the Doctor. And sadly, I feel like while I do like him, he feels distant. Though I also think that's due to the much shorter seasons and not inherently due to the writers or his performance. In fact, his performance is great. He's the best part of his own era for sure. Now, as for Ruby, she's cool. I don't hate her, but I just don't get any sort of strong feeling or connection to her, and maybe that's the point, because it seems like they were going for a best friend type of character instead of a Rose Tyler type romance. Thank God, by the way, I hated how they had that romance subplot, to be honest, but I just don't have any strong feelings for her. Plus, we've seen other examples of the Doctor's companion being a close friend. We've got Donna, Clara, Sarah Jane. Why did all those end in the ah sound? Anyways, so yeah. That's my general thoughts on Season 14, aka Season 1 on Disney+, but I also think I'll give you some episode suggestions for which episodes are the best of the season. They are Boom, 73 Yards, Dot and Bubble, and Rogue. Now on to Season 15, or Season 2 on Disney+. Season 15/2. I'll start right here. I think this season has much better episodes than the previous one, but I also think it still has some issues. And funnily enough, I also deeply dislike an episode from this season as well. Not as much as Space Babies, but it's close. First off, I do think the overarching plot here is much better. They did foreshadow the main villain of this season in the previous one, but I think they did a much better job with their main villain here. Now, I don't think it holds up to overarching plots like the Terran Time from the 11th Doctor's first season, but it's much better than the very lackluster story we got with Sutekh, and major spoiler here, the Ronnie, I think, was a much better choice of a villain to bring back than Sutekh. In my honest opinion, I think we should have just left Sutekh alone. But it makes absolute sense that the Ronnie would come back. If the Master can come back from the Time War, is it really that unbelievable that the Ronnie couldn't either? In fact, I like the dynamic of the two Ronnies here, or at least the idea of it. I wish we could have explored that dynamic a bit more. But that's also because we only get 8 episodes instead of 12 to 13. Which, side tangent here, how the hell is Doctor Who stuck to 8 episodes now because of Disney Plus, but Andor still gets 12? Don't get me wrong, Andor is already a classic. It's the best piece of Star Wars since the Clone Wars cartoon. But my point being is that with all the funds Disney could provide the Doctor Who, and they couldn't give it 12 episodes, I'm pretty sure Andor costs way more to make than Doctor Who anyway. And to be honest, do we really expect super high grade special effects from Who? I certainly don't. Give them 12 episodes already, damn it. On to my least favorite episode, which is also the first episode of this season. The Robot Revolution. So I'll easily say on record that this is nowhere near as terrible as Space Babies for me, but I still dislike it for what it does. Though this episode does have a lot of merit. I love the idea of Belinda, the Doctor's new companion, being made an empress of this robot-human world uprising thing. And the bit about everything being named Miss Belinda Chandra or something similar is just really funny. But I also like the grittier sense of warfare they provide to this episode, and I also like the whole idea of this AI generator being made the ultimate ruler of this world. The way they work around the coding and mechanical flaws of the AI system is super fun, until they get to their reveal. And behold, the episode is actually about incels. So here's the thing, I think RTD had good intentions in making this episode, but I seriously disagree with how he tackles the issue. For one, we don't even learn about how Al, the guy who becomes the AI generator, is an incel until like way later in the episode, like after the second act of the episode pretty much. There are like 0 hints of this whatsoever, not even subtle ones. It's shown to us way after the fact. I genuinely despise how they turned this whole episode into a joke because there's some serious empathetic exploration you could do here. I'm not even saying you have to redeem Al, because he literally became a dictator, but you're not going to explore at all why he became this way. Maybe it was actually because of a sense of universal loneliness, or he was taught bad morals by his family, or maybe he was exposed to the incel pipeline online. But nope, he's just a bad guy. And then he essentially dies. Okay, well, more specifically, a time thingy happens and he gets turned into a zygote and swept away by a polishing machine. So, not only does he die, but he basically gets reverted into nothing and swept away. And the Doctor just laughs at that? Like, holy shit, dude, that feels horrifically evil and mean-spirited. I'm not even saying that it isn't funny, but that felt super out of character for the Doctor. This feels like a gag out of a Deadpool comic, and not an especially funny one either. So yeah, this episode was a really good premise with a really bad execution. Luckily, this season gets way better after this. Which leads me into speaking about my favorite episode, probably the best of the 15th Doctor's whole era, that being The Story in the Engine. This episode feels like an encapsulation of everything this era wanted to be. It has gods, fantasy mixed with sci-fi elements, political and historical commentary. Hell, I think it has everything you could love out of an episode of Doctor Who. The premise of this barber who has to cut your hair as you tell a story is so captivating. And it does something that I think a lot of the best Doctor Who episodes do, which is taking something that seems either small or mundane and making it this grand, absurd concept. Plus, while I may not be black or African, I understand the feeling of speaking to your barber about what you've been going through, your story, and just yourself. Though I'm not always the most talkative, it's a very good experience to have a barber you can just speak to and be real with. But I just adore how it takes the sense of intimacy you get from that experience and flips it on its head. I think that plays a heavy part in the Doctor's character for this episode, and I think this episode has Ncuti's best performance in all of Doctor Who. There's so many great ideas. The main focal point of the episode being how stories are foundational parts of society, and how those stories form and change over time to show the growth of society and culture, and all that ties in with how the Doctor uses the stories and history he knows to defeat the Barber. I especially love how he has his hair braided in a way that ties back into the African slaves in the States and other places, which, I'll add here, we're horrifically undereducated on the history of slavery in the US, and I'd assume in many other places on the planet. The fact that I had to learn this piece of cultural history through an episode of Doctor Who is good on the show, but kinda makes me depressed to show me how little I truly know, despite the fact that I try to be aware and knowledgeable on the history of the world. Tangent aside, this episode is so good. It's one of the most beautiful episodes of Who ever written, an instant classic. The kids who grew up with this one will probably speak about it in the same way adults today talk about Midnight or Vincent and the Doctor and so many more. Here's where I'll talk more in depth about the season finale. And there's a lot to talk about with many spoilers, so consider this your first warning. The first episode, Wish World, I genuinely loved. It was so eerie seeing this warped reality from the mind of a disturbingly radicalized person to just make a worse world. There's so much social horror throughout this episode, on top of this X-Files-esque feeling that something is not completely right. I especially love the moment where the Doctor just offhandedly says a man is beautiful and that creates a minor panic. It's genuinely so absurd to think about, but that's how it was back then. Which is odd to think about because that was really only something during that time period. I mean, the Greeks and Romans and other cultures are making whole-ass statues of nude-ass men with their ding-dongs out. You really don't think they thought those men were beautiful? But of course, no need of worrying about that. Those values are definitely not coming back anytime soon. I'll say I love how they brought in Omega for the second part, at least in concept. I mean, we spent these 2 seasons fighting gods, so why not bring in Omega? He's essentially the god of the Time Lords. Not literally, but close enough. Though bringing him in the way they did, yeah, it was pretty lackluster. It was pretty lame how the Doctor beat him off too. Look, if I wanted to watch a terribly written Ghostbusters film, I'd go watch the 2016 film. I do love the subplot of Poppy and how they use it to make something interesting with the Doctor, though I also hate that it comes at the expense of Belinda. They basically just slide her into this generic mother role at the end, and exclusively that. In fact, they didn't really give Belinda much to do at all. She has a great personality and all that at the start, but it goes really nowhere. Don't get me wrong, I prefer her to Ruby, but it feels like they wanted someone who'd question the Doctor on his morality, but then decided to just toss that aside. I don't know, it sucks because her actress is really good, especially in Andor, but it feels like they just wasted her on this. And now, on to the controversial ending. There's parts I love and there's parts I don't. On the parts I like, I love the scene where they really double down on the Doctor feeling alone in the universe. I think the Doctor works best when he's this sort of lone wanderer type. Though I do feel like the fact that the Time Lords are sterile could have been foreshadowed much better. I love how they pull at the heartstrings when he speaks to Poppy, because he knows that this is something he'll never have, and that it's partially his fault. He did that during the Time War, and now he has only himself to blame. And here's the big spoiler, though I bet you've already been spoiled, but still, I thought I'd warn you. The regeneration is a bit of a mixed bag for me. For one, when he is regenerating, he does get a great speech. I do wish they gave Ncuti more speeches to do during this time as a Doctor, but I guess they didn't want to do that for the sake of freshness, which, fair enough, but his speech is just so great. Though I'm a bit conflicted at bringing Jodie Whittaker back to play the 13th Doctor here. Probably because I felt like this would have worked better a lot if this is just his moment alone. The same with many other regenerations, but I do think they both portrayed the moment well. I mean, Jodie's a great actress and she could have been a classic Doctor if the writing for her seasons was just better. But for what it is, it does work, but I do feel like it's a bit unnecessary. And here's the big controversy. Billie Piper being the 16th Doctor. Or at least what we know as the 16th Doctor at this point. Yes, I'm going to assume that she is the 16th Doctor until proven otherwise. Now, I have some mixed feelings. I do think that Billie will be a great Doctor. She's a phenomenal actress after all, and I don't think I've ever disliked any of her performances. Sure, I'm not the biggest fan of Rose Tyler, but that's not because of her performance. In fact, I think she was a great companion to the 9th Doctor. I just don't really care for the romance elements they added in later. But as a Doctor, I think she could be great. My real complaint comes in with that it does kind of feel like nostalgia bait. Mind you, I have zero nostalgia for Doctor Who. I didn't really grow up with it as a kid. But I feel like the fun of Who was seeing who will play the next Doctor. I was okay with Tennant being the 14th Doctor because that was more for only a few episodes and no more. To be fair, Billie has never played the Doctor before, but to me a new Doctor is usually meant to be a complete breath of fresh air. The only other time they did something similar to this was Capaldi, but he was only really like a side character in like a couple episodes from what I remember. He didn't play a major character until he was the Doctor. Again, I think she'll give a great performance and all, but man, do we just get a new face to associate with the Doctor? Hell, maybe I'm being blasphemous as fuck for saying this here, but hell, hire my ass to play the Doctor RTD. I'll give you a Northeastern American ass Doctor. Mix in the New Jersey and New York tone with that classic Doctor character. Just give us something new here at least, man. it's looking a bit uncertain for Doctor Who. And while this choice feels safe for now, I think the brand needs to start taking some chances. Because Who has been built on that since the beginning? It's a series that's always taking risks and chances, and while it doesn't always pay off, the successes clearly show when they succeed. And I hope they take that to heart. So, yeah, that's my feelings on the 15th Doctor's era in general. Do you agree? Do you not? And while I'm here, a friend and I have actually been writing down our concepts for what we'd do for our own era of Doctor Who. Of course, that's assuming if we were the showrunners, creatives, and other things associated with the role. Let me know if you'd be down to see that. Though I'd probably take some time to try and edit that well, but if that's something you'd want to see, seriously, let me know in the comments below. But with all that being said, I'll see you next time.